Hello, Garland Nixon here, and hanging out with Mark Sleboda, and we're going to talk about what's happening on the borders in Ukraine and in the South Caucasus and in Alaska. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. I don't know what the heck's going on with my One Rockfin channel, but who knows? Whatever. It's always a struggle here trying to figure out what's going on. But here's the important thing. We got Mark Sleboda. We got lots to talk about. But before we get going, I know what you're thinking. Where can I find Mark Sleboda on a regular basis? I can't get enough of Mark Sleboda. Well, I tell you where you go. Boosty.to/The Real Politique. That's right. Oh my gosh, we went from 150 last time. We're up to 161. So we're going to jump next 200 subscribers. He's up to 161 subscribers. We're looking for 200 subscribers. That is our next goal. You can be a part of that goal. And if you look on the here, you see everything Mark Sleboda, all that's happening, all he's doing, all he's talking about, you name it. Boosty.to/Mark Sleboda, and you can be a member, subscriber, and all that kind of stuff, and donate, because as you guys know, I'm sure by now, nobody around here doing this YouTube stuff is getting rich off of this by any stretch of the imagination. And for most of us, when it comes to our time and resources, it's actually pretty costly, but we do it because we believe in what we're doing. So support Mark Sleboda at boosty.to. All right, Mark, let's get going. Before we get started, and I tell you why I'm going to start here. Because I believe everything's generated from what's happening on the battlefield. Let's start with what's happening. You can't understand anything else if you don't understand what's happening on the battlefield. And Mark Sleboda, what's happening on the battlefild?
Garland, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And I can't agree more with you, right? There's all of this political farcical show that is going to happen in Alaska. And I think it's a mistake for everyone involved. I don't think anything positive is going to come out of this. And I'm almost certain that negative things are coming. But all of it is being driven by what is happening on the battlefield. Absolutely, right? So we saw Trump make threats, right? Unless Putin stops, right? Freezes the conflict, ceasefire, stop killing our proxy regime. Unless you stop, we're going to inflict massive secondary sanctions, secondary tariffs on anyone who still does business with you in 50 days. Russia ignores that, advances on the battlefield. Well, not 10 days or maybe 12, but, really quick, right? Russia continues advancing on the battlefield. We're so angry at you, we hit Modi. Bam! Modi says, Putin keeps advancing on the battlefield. Oh, we got to meet in Alaska. We got to meet. We're going to meet in Alaska, right? Right. All of this is being driven by desperation, by panic, by the need of the U.S., right, as the hedge fund. Let's forget the person of Donald Trump, because he's largely irrelevant in structural terms, right, to what is going on. A U.S. proxy regime is facing a absolutely catastrophic military situation. They're facing a deep operational crisis behind their lines in the Donbass, where the majority of the Kiev regime military is, right? In the entire country is still there. The majority is still fighting in the Donbass. They're facing a deep operational crisis because of a deep Russian flanking move that has penetrated through their defenses deep into their rear. A year ago, we were talking about the Ocheretna bloom after punching through Avdiivka, right? This is like that, except because it comes later in the attritional stage, it's even more significant. And therefore, the U.S., they need to stop this conflict now. Just like all the way back in 2015, there was a desperate need after Debaltseve to stop the DPR, the Donetsk militias from completely wiping out the Kiev regime military, right? What military that they had been able to cobble together after their military just kind of disappeared after the Westback Maidan Putsch in 2014. Their military, such that they'd been able to reform, had been defeated. And then Angela Merkel comes running to Moscow to speak to Putin. Freeze! We got to stop things. Ceasefire. Minsk too. Let's settle this diplomatically, right? Well, we're going through the same process again. Now it's Trump, right? Although Trump isn't running to Moscow, at least not yet. Then it's like, why don't you come over to Alaska, right? I know there's some people that are, like, oh, the symbolism. Russia once owned Alaska back in prehistory, and it's symbolic of what? It doesn't mean anything. In fact, evidently, where they're meeting is where some Russian pilots are buried, right? It's a military base. I'm not exactly sure that's the symbolism we want for this. I think it's bad symbolism. Garland, you've seen Return of the Jedi, right? You know that meme when the rebel fleet comes out of hyperdrive or whatever, and they're coming up in Return of the Jedi at the end for the big space battle against the Death Star, and they find that the force shields are up, and the fish guy, the Mon Calamari, Admiral Akbar, is spinning around in his chair going, "It's a trap," right? This is a trap, right? This is, first of all, we can't completely discount. It's not likely, but we can't even completely discount the idea of a direct trap, because this regime in the U.S. can't be trusted, right? They just feigned diplomatic meetings with Iran in order to give Israel a surprise attack and a decapitation strike to attempt to wipe out the Iranian political and military leadership. Right?
There's another important factor, and that is this regime isn't even a unified regime, because one faction could say, we're going to get a deal, and the other faction could say, we got to do something to stop that deal. Let's do something crazy. So if it was just a reckless regime, you'd even be safer.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. Trump obviously doesn't have complete control of his government. He's at odds with his blob, his deep state, whatever you want to call it. Even people within his own administration, right? Kellogg, Rubio, they're not on board, with any. Even if Trump was serious about a deal, which I'm not. I don't believe that he has any conviction in that regard. But even if he was, it's moot. Right. And you're right. He doesn't have complete control of the government. So whether his administration would follow through, decapitation strike in Iran, decapitation strike Hamas, decapitation strike Hezbollah, him just gloating obscenely in the last week again about his assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian IRG said, whom at one point the U.S. grudgingly admitted was instrumental to defeating ISIS on the ground in Iraq, outside the gates of Baghdad.
That's what really pissed them off, if you want the truth, because ISIS is their boys.
So I don't trust this, right?
Right.
I don't trust him. I don't trust his control over his own crazies, right? I don't trust any of that. But even that aside, this whole thing is designed to be a pressure operation to force Russia to, one, accept the ceasefire, and two, meet with Zelensky as part of that, right? They even tried that, right? Let's meet in Alaska, and then they leaked to the press that Zelensky was going to be there, and then Russia's like, well, we're not coming, and then they leaked to the press that, well, if he's not going to meet with Zelensky, then there is going to be no meeting. And then Russia's like, okay, no meeting then. And then they're like, well, okay, he doesn't have to meet with Zelensky, right? That was this walk back. And the same thing with sanctions. We're going to sanction them. If he doesn't agree to a ceasefire, there's going to be very severe consequences. Are you going to tariff him? Yeah, there's going to be massive tariffs. And then the next day, well, maybe there'll be tariffs. Maybe there won't be. They're making all sorts of threats. They're already planning the next meeting, right? Between Putin and Zelensky, and Trump just may be there, right? He's not going to be making the deal. They're going to be making the deal because they're still playing this petty charades game where they pretend that this isn't a US-Russia conflict, even though Rubio at one point actually came out and admitted that this is a US proxy war against Russia, and then they just, never mentioned it again, right? They're still going through this pantomime, this charade. So the next meeting is going to be between Putin and Zelensky, and Russia's like, we're not going to agree to that. And then they're like, well, maybe there won't be a next meeting. We don't know yet, right? All over the place. Just the signaling out of this administration is just, I don't know. I understand there's some people still out there that want to say that this is some kind of 5D chess play to outfox Lindsey Graham and the neocons. No, it's just FUBAR, right? It's the old military acronym. They don't know what the hell they're doing, right? I mean, they want to try to pressure Russia into something to stop beating up on their proxy regime, right? While there's still a proxy regime to save. But they've got no pressure left. They've got no sanctions pressure. They've got no military pressure. They've got nothing. So now they're resorting to some kind of PR pressure, some belief that Trump in the flesh, his massive ego and charisma, or whatever, if you want to call it that, is somehow going to force concessions out of Putin. And none of that's going to happen. Right? I mean, they're already saying, right? There's nothing, both sides are saying there's no agreement going to be made out of this, right? There's nothing going to be agreed to. They're walking back expectations, right? They released this. It's just going to be a listening exercise, right? We're just going to feel out the Russians and find out what they really want. As if they haven't been saying what their terms are for a ceasefire, for an end to the conflict ad nauseum since before last June, right? Last June at the minimum. And they're still like, well, we don't know what the Russians want. We've told you what we want. No, but what do you really want? I mean, I know that's what you say, but what will you really accept? No, really, we're winning. We're not going to make any concessions. That's what we want. No, but I mean, really, like behind closed doors. It's the same as in front of doors. No concessions, right? These are our terms. And then when Putin says, niet, right? No, again, to Trump's face this time, not over the phone, right? All Putin's diplomatic politeness and professional, this game of, because let's be frank, the Kremlin has played the game of playing and trying to manipulate Trump's ego and narcissism, just like everyone else inside and outside of his administration has been doing to him, because that's what he demands, right? He's the God Emperor of mankind. Everyone is supposed to come to his court and pay court to him, right? So, yes, Medvedev has said a little more honest words, playing the bad cop, the troll in the background. But Putin has always been unfailingly polite and diplomatic. And Trump has complained about that. We have a really nice conversation. And then the war continues that night, right? Russian airstrikes and drone strikes hit something in Kiev. Well, why didn't he stop? Because we had a nice conversation and I asked him, pretty pleased to. It's just, it's childish. But that's the mentality that they're going into this with. And I'm afraid that when Putin says no again, not over the phone, not through Witkoff and some other intermediary, but to Trump's face, that Trump is going to have a more visceral and emotional reaction and is going to throw the biggest tantrum that we've seen yet, because he's going to be denied something that he both wants and needs. And then the potential for escalation coming out of that is just, I think, not worth whatever farcical show is being put on here. I don't understand the meaning of this. We know that nothing is going to be agreed upon, right? That whatever Trump may believe or want or not want is moot, right? Let's not even try to psychoanalyze Trump going back and forth and whatever. The U.S. Congress is against anything, bipartisan, both sides, right? The deep state, the blob, the pyramid of bureaucracy, the CIA, the State Department, everyone is against anything. The military-industrial complex is against any ending of the conflict. The mainstream media is absolutely vehemently against any type of peace agreement. The Europeans and the Kiev regime are completely against any concessions whatsoever. In fact, they're going even more ridiculous in demands this week. So if Trump, in any span of 15 minutes, had any moment of sincerity, it doesn't matter. That's structural, right? This is structural realism. Trump doesn't have the political ability, the capital, to make the concessions that Russia is demanding, and Russia's not going to back off of their concessions. So why are we doing this? I don't understand the purpose of this. It's going through the diplomatic motions. I don't think that's necessary. Real diplomacy is done by diplomats, right? It's not. Of course, Trump doesn't believe that, right? Trump administration doesn't have the patience or the capability of doing serious diplomacy, right? They're like, yeah, let's negotiate with Iran, and Netanyahu's like, I want to bomb them. And they're like, okay, let's do that.
The U.S. doesn't. Biden had Blinken. The U.S. is incapable. The U.S., because of its internal narrative that it is the hegemon, when it ain't. If it was, it could be, it wouldn't have to. It ain't no more. When it says to India, you better do this, and India says, I'm going to go over and talk to Beijing. We ain't doing that. You can't force India to do what you want. They can't force anybody to do what they want. When you get to that point, you don't have the capability to dominate anymore. But you know what it's like? The boxer who's like 42 and still thinks he can box, and he goes out and he wants to, the young guys, I'm going to beat you, I'll knock you out of that. The U.S. doesn't understand that it's 42 and it's out of shape and it can't fight you know what I mean? That's what it is. So mentally, they can talk trash, they can make demands to Russia and China and India. In the real world, people are going to say, no, you can't defeat us on the battlefield. You can't dominate us economically. The days when we had to listen to you are over. And in fact, some people will deliberately push back just to show that they can do it now.
Yeah, I want to draw one distinction, though, because I think the Blinken-Sullivan administration refused, out of ideological, geopolitical terms, to do diplomacy. This administration claims it wants to do them, right? But is mentally and in terms of simple capability, they're of the roster of this administration of doing serious diplomatic work. They're incompetent and incapable of it. Trump has the attention span of some ADHD kid, right, in school. That I mean, no offense to ADHD. It's an analogy, people, right? I realize it's a serious thing or whatever. Trump is not a serious thing. So maybe it's a bad analogy.
Well, don't you have to have here's the thing about it. Blinken was a guy who walked around for 20 years carrying Joe Biden's coat and umbrella. He was had no background, nothing, zero. He had no capability, you know what I mean, to do what he was put in there to do. He wasn't able to do it. Now who's he bringing? Rubio. Rubio's no genius. Rubio's an idiot, in my opinion. I don't think he's smart, and he's hollow. He does what he's told, and power runs through him. He's a conduit. So either way, you have people who, even if they wanted to, and look at Wang Yi and look at Lavrov and look at these guys' background of all of the years learning and studying the trade of what they do. They're competent to do that thing, even whether they want to or not. Our system does not reward competence. It doesn't say we've got to have a guy who's got a background in doing this in order to put him in this position, so that we end up with some schmuck every time.
Yeah. For years on your show, I was calling Blinken's State Department the Department of War, right? It was more peaceful. And then as he left office, the New York Times ran a column admitting Yeah, under Blinken, it was really the Department of War, not the Department of State, right? So it's nice the New York Times can catch up with us, right? And now we have Rubio. Rubio is not on the same page. He's a neocon. This appointing him as Secretary of State was a political gesture at the neocons, right? To bring them in, to defang them, right? To bring them in to his administration. And anytime that he doesn't agree with something, he's never called on to do anything. He just fades into the background. And Trump sends his real estate developer friend Witkoff to Gaza or to Moscow or whatever. And he may be, I mean, if you want to consider any New York real estate developers as sincere good guys, I don't, right? I'm going to be perfectly honest. But at least he doesn't carry the ideological baggage of a neocon or someone in the deep state. All right. So there's that. But he is incapable of doing the work because he doesn't have the training. It's a double-edged sword, right? If you want someone with the training and the experience, 99 times out of 100, they come with the ideological baggage of U.S. exceptionalism and the bipartisan neocon, dominance of U.S. foreign policy. And if you're looking for someone outside of that, usually they have no experience and no training, and we get Witkoff, right? So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. But either way, they're incapable of doing serious diplomatic work. And instead they let's just bomb instead, right? I mean, that's been their playbook so far. So I know Putin, they've said outright, yes, we're going to talk about Ukraine, but we're also, being the adults in the room, we want to talk about a common reforged European security architecture. We want to restart serious new arms control limitations, all of this stuff. And none of that is going to happen, right? First of all, no progress is going to be made on anything bilaterally without Putin making concessions on Ukraine, which he's not going to do, right? There was this gesture, Rubio, Lavrov, these talks in Riyadh and everything to restore diplomatic relations to basic functioning level where has that gone? Nowhere, right? It's just completely vanished.
They can't even get direct flights.
You can't even get direct
flights. The most basic, the simplest thing. Donald Trump could pick up a phone. He wouldn't have to write anything and say, hey, FCC, let's do the direct flights. Make it happen tomorrow.
They can't return the U.S. the Russian diplomatic property that they stole, right? And so nothing is going to be done bilaterally. And it's not even a question of just bilaterally without any concessions on Ukraine, which makes it a political impossibility for the Trump administration. I don't think that this administration, these people, are capable of engaging in serious work planning out a common European security architecture into the future, or doing, a new START treaty, right, that takes into account AI and hypersonic weapons and all of these, drones and all of these new capabilities, right, of bringing China and the UK and France and India and Pakistan, as other nuclear powers that would have to be brought into this in the modern day. It's North Korea, Israel, right? This administration is not competent or capable of engaging in serious, world order stability level diplomatic work like this. They don't have the patience for it. They don't have the mentality or the capability. And it's not just Trump. We all know Trump doesn't have that, right? But the president doesn't necessarily need it. Ronald Reagan didn't need it either. But then they have teams of competent people. I don't see that in this administration. And what competent people they do have, a handful of them, are hamstrung by 5 other people that are just all in completely opposite directions. You got Tulsi Gabbard and then you got everybody else, right? I mean, that's the story. So I see no potential for anything positive coming out of this, and I only see potential for negative. At best, this is going to be a meaningless photo op where Trump is going to declare victory and say how great it was and so much progress, and then at the end of the day we'll find out a week later that nothing was actually agreed upon and nothing actually happened. That is the best result that we can hope for.
You know, I do have a second thought, just an alternative perspective that
Sure.
I'll throw at you for a second, and that is that the conversation that you and I are having right now is so obvious that Putin and Lavrov, et cetera, are having the same conversation. I don't underestimate those guys. I like to have a talk and say, hey, you know what? I think, I don't know about this. But I also at least think that we should consider the fact, because they've been pretty sharp. I'm not saying they've made everything right, but in comparison to their adversaries, for God's sake, you know what I mean? They've been pretty smart guys. And if you look at what they've done to Russia, how they've turned this country around and what they've done, it's pretty incredible. And historically speaking, you know, to turn a country around, Russia and China, both, what they've done in the last, Russia 25 years, China 40 years, it's really incredible. So let me throw this at you. Let's say they know all of this and they got another plan. And
I agree with you. The Kremlin must understand this.
Yeah. So, and they're like, you know what? Let me give you just a thought. One of the things, look, the whole conversation in the West is this is a war for conquest and imperialism, and they want to take ground. But that ain't it. That ain't it. And we know that ain't it. But that's why, you know, as they say in Zen, right? The tiger and the shark shall never fight, for they have no common ground, right? That's why there can't be a discussion, really. Because as long as I say this is about NATO expansion, and you say, well, let's talk about how much ground you can give. You can take this ground because we know this is about how much ground you want to take, and you want to take land. As long as we do that, we're getting anywhere. What if they look at it possibly, and I think it's possible, as an opportunity to really change the narrative, to sit down and put it in their face. We're here to talk about NATO expansion, but a possibility. Putin had said all along, I ain't talking to Trump. The time will come, we'll talk to Trump. What happens if Witkoff says, okay, you got us. We're willing to sit down and talk about.
Yeah, that's a concession.
Yeah,
Putin made a concession there.
Yeah. So if they said, we're here to talk about NATO expansion, and Putin says, if you're going to talk about NATO expansion, we'll meet you. We'll do that. That's what we want to talk about. You're finally going to accept that? Yes. And then Putin says, well, you know what? They said something acceptable. Not acceptable that we'll end it. Acceptable that we will have the meeting that they've been asking, that we said no. And now they said, okay, we'll talk about NATO. And we'll know based on what happened anyway. I'm just throwing that at you as a possibility that these people are pretty sharp and they know what the hell's going on, and maybe they have an alternative plan. Mark,
I'll one up you. I agree that they must understand that at the very least, right? Let's forget Trump. Let's even forget, you know, the U.S. government beyond Trump. Let's just talk in terms of Kiev and Europe. They've been clear they won't agree to any of this, right? So you know, anything that's being talked about. I mean, Russia hasn't talked about anything. The Western media is going crazy with all kinds of rumors and already doing this carving up and swapping of land here and that. And Russia's like, no, we're not actually talking about any of that, right? I mean, that's not what we're talking about. So, you know, they can play those games. So the Kremlin must understand that there's no agreement or diplomatic solution going to come out of this talk. Right. So then we come to the point. All right. So we'll attempt to change the narrative. But I think they almost also must understand that when you're playing with Trump and his social media meme machine, that he is just going to trump all over anything intelligent and adult that you try to say. Right. I mean, it's just going to come out in screaming capital letters on Truth Social and in the most childish and puerile and the tantrum that he's going to throw. You can't win that type of narrative game with Trump, because Trump is always going to reduce everything down to the lowest common denominator of online idiocy, which is what he does, right? He brings everything down into the undiplomatic. So they probably also understand that. So then why did they agree to this? I'm genuinely mystified.
How about
They
this?
must.
Let me throw one at you.
Yeah.
You know, in a couple of weeks, Putin's going to China and Beijing.
Yeah.
I wonder if, I'm not going to say what kind of announcement, but if announcements could be made. If some, before we have this talk in Beijing and we announce whatever we may announce, I'm not saying it's going to be a military alliance. I'm not going to say what it was, but before he meets there, possibly maybe a good idea to, I'll put it like this, because I'm not going to go down the road based on what I've seen of Lavrov and Putin. I'm not going to go down the road and say they're just a bunch of naive idiots and they don't know what they're doing. I think they're pretty damn smart.
Yeah, they are.
I think we just got to figure them out. But at any rate, your thoughts about, do you think, I don't know, Mark. I don't know. I think
there is the potential that this is all being done to say that they've dotted every I, crossed every T, and made every diplomatic effort possible. Fine. You want to meet in person? We'll play that game too. And that could be done as a nod at India, right? Who is now facing potential. Yeah, it's actually only 25% on 20% of India's actual exports, right? Details that no one wants to examine, right? But it could get worse, right? So making gesture towards the rest of the BRICS leaders, and that, both the core BRICS and the new expanded BRICS, right? That we are the diplomatic adults. We tried to do diplomacy. We tried to reason with them, and they just went with this PR show. There's that. I don't think that that's necessary at this point, but I don't know. Maybe they feel it is. So that is a possible rationale for this.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what we hear. But at any rate, let's your thought. We've been, for I don't know how long, we've been talking, me and you and lots of people have been talking about using this word. I've started using it from the beginning. Collapse on the battlefield. And as I look at what's happening, it's kind of the old saying about the person who went broke, right? First slowly and then suddenly, right? It seems that this attritional warfare has been, nicking away at the foundation of Ukrainian military power, and it seems to be in deep trouble. And of course, that's what this is about. But it seems that, because what would happen is, like me and the other people say, yeah, it looks like this fall's it. That's it. Ukraine's done this fall. And then the fall would go by and Russia would keep doing what he did. Okay, I guess the spring there'll be a bigger fall. Yeah, I'm really starting to finally feel as though, somebody's yanking that last block out of the Jenga thing and the whole wooden little structures is going to drop. It looks like there's problems there. Your thoughts on what you know about the battlefield and your evaluation of where we are.
Okay, so what we've had it's been building up over the last month and has in the last 2 or 3 weeks really exploded is this deep flanking operation around Pokrovsk and between Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka in south central Donbass, that there has now been an even deeper north and western penetration around Pokrovsk that has punched through all the Kiev regime's defenses, including reportedly the new defensive line that they were erecting behind the last defensive line of Konstantinovka, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka. They've just punched deep into the Kiev regime's operational rear and are wreaking havoc. And the Kiev regime can't seem to do anything to stop them. They've called up Azov now, although I don't expect them to do any more than anything else. So, and all the Kiev regime military commanders are screaming about this, and it's become clear one of the major reasons for this is the Kiev regime's manpower woes, right? They do not have enough infantry to defend the contact line, not even where it's hottest, right, around Pokrovsk, much less the entirety of the contact line. And Russia, they successfully infiltrated groups past the contact line, built up a critical mass, and discovered a window of opportunity, right? And they just, boom, they went for it, right? So we've got this deep penetration, penetration now. And it is a result of nearly 3 years of attritional strategy. The butcher's bill of that strategy is coming due now, right? Because in terms of manpower, the Kiev regime's military is now down to probably around 200,000 vaguely combat capable people left now, while the Russian military just keeps getting bigger and bigger and stronger every month, right? That gap keeps growing every day, right? The Russian military is getting bigger and more experienced, and the Kiev regime military is getting smaller, and they're losing what people they had with any military experience and training increasingly. So the gap just keeps growing enormously. Now, that said, this word collapse has just been tossed around from the beginning of this conflict. I remember in the very beginning of the conflicts, I was on shows with some other analysts. They're like, oh, they're going to collapse in 2 months. It'll all be over. And they've been saying the same thing again and again and again for 3 months. And I don't know. I've always been of the opinion that this is going to be a long, hard, bloody, nasty war. And I still don't think it's over yet. I see lots of holes. I see crumbling, right? But I will admit that I have continually been amazed at how this regime has been able to mass conscript people and force them to fight and die for it. And when they're in a normal situation, if it was you or me, I mean, yes, they've had 400,000 some desertions, right? But even then, how many haven't? I'm always continually amazed that they're still fighting. I know the Banderites will fight to the bitter end and beyond. We'll be dealing with undead Banderites coming out of the grave in Lvov for the next century, probably, right? But when we're not talking about the ideologicals, there's still enough that they've just managed to coerce and to create the military structures where they are forced to fight and die. And I know a lot of people just want to believe that at some point they're just not going to be able to fight anymore and it's just going to be over the next day. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think we are seeing a crumbling, but the collapse isn't going to be dramatic and sudden. And even when that quote unquote collapse happens, that doesn't mean that the military conflict is over, because there's still a core 100,000, 75,000, 100,000 neo-Nazis, Banderites in this country. They're not going to surrender, right? Even if Zelensky did, and he's a delusional, he's fully on board. I mean, he's crazy at this point. Zelensky's, his own people said he's messianic, right? That he's the emperor with no clothes. He makes Trump look sane. He's not going to back down. He's not going to surrender. He's internalized all of this Banderite. He wasn't when he came in, but he's internalized it all. So I think they'll fight. Their combat capability will continue to go down. But at the end of the day, there are still a certain amount of people that will fight, no matter, we're talking guerrilla warfare, terrorism, the very nastiest things that are already, occurring at some level. And Ukraine is very, very big. And if they don't surrender, right? If they don't just give up, that means Russia has got to go building to building in this enormous country and then expend troops to physically occupy every town and settlement and so forth. That's a long, hard, bloody process, even after the Kiev regime is attrited down to the point where they can't strategically resist anymore. It's still going to be a long I'm afraid that it's going to be a long, and there's just not going to be a clean, quick victory. Mearsheimer said it again and again. I love the description. Russia's going to win, but it's going to be an ugly victory, right? Like Syria. Russia won in Syria, but it was an ugly victory, right? The U.S. and the Kurds camped out in 1/3 of the country. The Turks and Al Qaeda and the 99 flavors of jihad camped out in the north of the country. And then ultimately, Russia lost the peace. So people should not celebrate too much. People should, and I assume that the Russian military is there, that the Kremlin is there, but I also think that in the alt media, we also need to caution people to just be cautious, to not expect too much. Putin said this to Lukashenko just a couple weeks ago, or was it last week even? And I believe he was actually addressing Trump, that this type of disappointment and frustration comes from an excess of expectations. Let's not our expectations run away. They're just, when it comes to military, there's very rarely quick, clean victories, right? And even the U.S. in Iraq, right, in 2003. Oh, that's it. Saddam regime is gone, and he's dead and hanged, and we can remake the Middle East now. 5 years later, into a bloody occupation, and I'm not saying that that's what's necessarily what's going to happen, and certainly not in all of Ukraine, but what I'm saying is real war, real conflict, these real things, these are dirty, nasty, bloody things, and they don't often end in the modern day with this Westphalian signature and peace and things like that, like World War II ended. We should not expect something like that.
I also think that with Russia, the real change that will eventually come, I agree with you, but because what you're talking is, this is Europe's plan. They're not stupid. Well, they are stupid, but they know, okay, we're going to lose this.
They're crazy. They're not stupid. They're crazy.
Right. And so it's okay, we're going to lose this, but who cares? The Ukrainians get wiped out, so they're expendable. But then we'll reform Zelensky in Paris or some friggin' where. We'll say we have a government outside, in exile, and then we'll try to keep whatever. That's their plan anyway. I do think the long term is this. I do think there will be a whole lot of regime change over the next 10 years in Europe, and a whole lot of dysfunction and political instability in Europe. But we don't know what's going to happen. But I think that is going to have a dramatic effect on this thing. But I think you're right. This is a long-term project. Russia didn't have any other options. We got 10 minutes left, Mark. 9, actually, before I got to run. I want to ask you about the Caucasus, which again is evidence. Hey, let's make a deal. You're trying to stick a knife in my back at the same time you're telling me let's make a deal about the front, and you got a knife pointing in my back.
Okay, so let me just finish up what you were saying there to punch it home. Almost every single European political and military leader right now, just do a Google search on it, is saying that they expect to be at war with Russia in somewhere between 2 or 5 or 10 years, right? They all say it to a man, right? That's all. Russia's going to invade us rather than we're going to send troops into Ukraine or Moldova or Belarus or wherever. But Europe is never going to agree to a peace. And, I don't think the U.S. intends to either, right? They just reprioritizing things. They want to go deal with China, and they don't want to deal with Russia. They want Europe to pick up the burden share there. That doesn't mean that they want to come to an advantageous peace with Russia. They just want to dump it all on Europe and let Europe carry it forward. At least the Trump administration, Trump himself does. With regards to the South Caucasus, exactly, right? They're talking, oh, an end to the conflict and everything. And like, all right, well, we got to freeze this thing and wind this thing down in Ukraine. It's not going the way we wanted it to right now. Let's restart it up in a few years. And meanwhile, we find another place to provoke another area to gain advantage against Russia. And right now, that is the South Caucasus. And we talked about this several times over the last few weeks. I did a video on it on my own channel a month ago about the Zangezur corridor, right, in Armenia, between both sides of Azerbaijan, with Turkey leaning in on this, and what a geopolitical hotspot and how it was coming to the fore. And now Trump has arranged a peace agreement, right, whereby the pro-Western prime minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, has essentially found a way to move Armenia into the West's sphere of influence, right? He wishes that little landlocked poor Armenia in the South Caucasus, right, stuck between in the Caucasus in a mountain hilliness environment between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, but Armenia having a border with neither of those, right? He wishes Armenia was some little island stuck somewhere in the Atlantic between the US and the UK. It's not, right? It's there. And yes, there's lots of political opposition to him from the church, from the conservative, everything at home that he's stamping down on. But he has found the way to become geopolitically important to the West, and he believes then drawn into the West sphere of influence, and thus escape the Russian sphere of influence, and actually to collapse the Russian sphere of influence in the South Caucasus, because Russia still has military bases in Armenia. But effectively, what he's done is surrendered Armenia in the pursuit of this to its two historical, traditional enemies, Azerbaijan and Turkey. Right. First, he surrendered the occupied territories. All right. Well, they probably should have been given back a long time ago anyway, but also Nagorno-Karabakh. And now he's surrendered this southern Armenia, this Suksian province, the Zangezur corridor, that bisects mainland Azerbaijan from the Nakhchivan autonomous region tucked up against Turkey. And he's surrendered this, right? And he didn't surrender it to the Azerbaijan. They've discovered a mechanism to bring the West in. They've surrendered it to the US, right? This is someone, I believe that this may have actually been Erdogan's gun. It's just Erdogan's stink to it, because he's heavily involved in this. Now, what this will allow them to do, other than cut Russia out of the South Caucasus, but it's pipeline politics. You can put pipeline Azerbaijani gas directly then through Armenia, through Nakhchivan and Turkey and into Europe, right? To provide another energy supply to Europe, not dependent at all on Russia. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan is growing closer to the Kiev regime in Ukraine and assisting them in a whole variety of ways all the time. And Pashinyan is on board on this. There's even rumors that Trump is talking about attempting to bring both Azerbaijan and Armenia together into NATO. And all Pashinyan had to do with this is surrender his country to their ancient enemies, the Turks and the Azerbaijani, right? To become geopolitically important to the West, such that they were willing to expend. And, right, there's a lot of problems with this, right? It's all supposed to be done by some US PMC that doesn't even exist yet. This has got to be shoved through the Armenian legislature, right? They've got to make constitutional changes. Yeah, there could be a civil war in Armenia.
And Iran says they may go to war.
Iran, because this Armenia has a border with Iran where they do trade. And Iran sees this as an existential threat to them, to their north, right? And we can't have a U.S. military base, right up there in that section as well, too. They're saying, at least, they're willing to go to war. Russia's being a lot quieter right now because I think they believe that this is not going to work, right? This is some kind of Hail Mary pass into the South Caucasus. One, it's got to be shoved through what I believe is a majority domestic political opposition in Armenia to all of this. And two, logistically, it's like some kind of crazy modern day Berlin airlift. How does the U.S. military or even a PMC working with the military maintain and govern something in a landlocked country on the other side of the Black Sea like this? I think Russia's like,
they'd be in a way, it's like, yes, we'll be right on their border, but in a way, you're trapped.
Yeah,
in a way, they could obliterate you. I mean, if you put nukes in there or something like that, but then that's war. But you'd be that base there would be a right target for obliteration in about 10 seconds if anything started. I won't be on that. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, it's really strange. I think Russia and Iran are both caught flat-footed by this. They haven't agreed on a response yet. They haven't decided on one because they think this is crazy. What are they doing, right? This can't possibly work. Well, we'll see that going forward, whether it works or not. But even the attempt is kind of a geopolitical coup d'etat by Trump, right, in the South Caucasus. He's attempting to take the South Caucasus, something that is heavily Soviet Russian sphere of influence, with then Iran to a certain extent too, and cutting them both out of this, leaving, by the way, Erdogan free to pursue pan-Turkic dreams of neo-Ottoman dreams through the region, which is a whole nother problem. But the idea that the U.S. can just turn over from outside the theater and completely take over the geopolitical influence in the South Caucasus overnight. I said it's a crazy, hazy Hail Mary pass. And I think one of the reasons that Russia's response has been so restrained yet, they're like, there's no way this is going to work. But it doesn't mean they shouldn't decide on a response. They have better come up with a response, and it better be a good one, because even crazy sometimes can seriously upset. At the end of the day, Russia has, and it's been on a trajectory a long time, to lose influence in the South Caucasus, right? It has maintained influence there since the dissolution of the Soviet Union by balancing the relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And let's be frank, often playing them against each other. That is gone now. Azerbaijan won the conflict. Pashinyan is a pro-Western leader who's so determined to bring Armenia into the West that he surrendered his country to the Azerbaijanis and the Turks. And so that balance, that equilibrium, that whole game is gone now, right? The whole political structure of Russian influence in the South Caucasus is gone. Obviously, that's going to lead almost certainly to a decrease in Russian influence. And that's okay, right? I mean, Russia has different geopolitical horizons than the Soviet Union. And yes, they're far more focused on what's going on in Ukraine right now as the most essential thing. That's understandable. But eventually they're going to have to come back and deal with this in one way or another. It's okay that they lose influence there, right? They were prepared for that. They were prepared under the 2020 ceasefire agreement that they brokered between Armenia and Azerbaijan to open the Zangezur corridor to Azerbaijan, but under their control, under Russian border patrol control, right? That was the deal. Now they've been cut out of everything altogether. So while it's not a problem for them to lose influence, it's another thing entirely for the U.S. to just drop into the South Caucasus and say, this is ours now. That's a problem. They're going to have to.
I'm just about out of time, Mark. So let me remind everybody before we go, it is critical. If you, and I'm sure you do, want to find out what's going on with Mark Sleboda, go to Boosty. That's boosty.to / that's BOOSTY, boosty.to / The Real Politique. There you go. All things Mark Sleboda. We're up to 161 subscribers, and now we're on the march for 200 subscribers. So we've crossed 150. We're heading forward towards 200. So let's try to get that by next week. I think we can get 49 in a week. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. Particularly with what's going on this weekend. You know, Mark's going to be all over it. So you're going to have to be a subscriber. You're going to have to be on boosty.to, the Real Politique this weekend, because Mark's going to have the inside scoop. He's going to let you know what's happening from Moscow. So make sure you're on top of that. Mark, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
Garland, thanks for having me. Always an honor and a pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.